And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the CAAR 2020 virtual legislative breakfast. Just like to remind everyone that this is a BYOB event. Bring your own bagel. I don't write them, I just deliver them. I'm Tom Wolfick, and for another week or so, I am CAAR's 2020 president. Protecting property rights and homeownership opportunities is one of the 4 pillars in CAAR's strategic plan. But advocacy does not stop at the ballot box. Working with our colleagues at Virginia Realtors, we impact the General Assembly every day. Advocacy takes many forms. As realtors, we make our political voices heard through our individual investment to the Realtors Political Action Committee, or RPAC. I'm happy to report that we now have over 500 CAAR investor members this year and 25 major investors. Many thanks to CAAR's RPAC co-chairs Kim Armstrong and Jim Dickerson for this outstanding accomplishment in a most interesting year. I would also like to recognize Anthony Reedy, Vice President of Political Operations, and Mary Lawson, Vice President of Legislative Affairs from Virginia Realtors, who are joining us today. This morning, we have much of our legislative delegation with us. We are lucky to have both seasoned and new legislators in our delegation to provide a welcome balance of political wisdom, new energy, and new ideas. I would now like to introduce and welcome our representatives to CAAR this morning. State Senator Creigh Deeds represents the 25th Senate District, which includes Allegheny, Bath, Highland, Nelson, and Rock Ridge counties, as well as a portion of Albemarle County. Creigh has served in the state Senate since 2001. He served in the House of Delegates from 1992 to 2001. Delegate Rob Bell is in the middle of his 9th term representing the 58th District. The 58th District includes parts of Albemarle, Fluvanna, Greene, and Rockingham counties. 57th District Delegate Sally Hudson is in the middle of her 1st term in the House. The 57th District includes the city of Charlottesville, as well as a portion of Albemarle County. The 25th District, which includes Augusta County, Rockingham, and portions of western Albemarle County, also features 1st-term Delegate Chris Runyon. Today, I have asked CAAR's Government Affairs Director, Neil Williamson, to moderate this morning's panel. As president of the Free Enterprise Forum, Neil works with state and local governments to protect property rights and homeownership opportunities. Please join me in welcoming Neil to the stage. I will now silence myself, and Neil, I hand the event over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. What a difference a year makes. A year ago, we were hosting CAAR's first legislative breakfast in the newly opened Hillsdale Conference Center. Today, we somewhat routinely meet virtually to discuss a most unusual General Assembly session ahead. To catch you up, most of the legislative sessions and committee meetings will be held virtually with limited or no physical access from advocacy groups. All 100 members of the House of Delegates will be up for election in November of 2021, and several sitting legislators have announced their intentions to run for statewide political office next year. This dynamic will create a heightened awareness of policy decisions on the political contests in next year's primary and general elections. With that in mind, and as a result of a member-driven agenda-building process earlier this year, the Virginia Realtors Board of Directors and Public Policy Committee have approved the following issues for inclusion in our 2021 legislative agenda. Number 1 is homeowners associations and condo owners associations. We're going to be working with stakeholders to introduce legislation to allow homeowners and condo unit owners associations to conduct their annual meetings virtually. The AG has already ruled that this is a legal move, but the idea is to catch the code up to reality. We're also going to be working on 2 so-called legislative fixes in the Landlord-Tenant Act. One is related to the source of funds in a sales transaction, which was really a holdover from something that was supposed to only apply in rental transactions, but is now impacting some cash sales transactions of real estate. And the other is to conform Virginia law to the 2018 federal Protecting Tenants in Foreclosure Act. In reality, the federal law would control, but again, you want to have Virginia code conform to the federal code. Finally, in a short session, rather than seeking specific 2021 legislation, realtors are asking the Housing Commission to study 2 issues in 2021 to inform potential legislation in 2022 regarding hybrid appraisals and who can conduct them and how they're conducted, as well as how we could possibly get the septic and well records across the Commonwealth digitized. It is something that some places have done and some places haven't done, and there's a lot of ways to fix it, but we didn't want to come forward with a prescriptive change. Rather, we wanted to gather the stakeholders and work with the Housing Commission to find a change that would work for everybody, and probably see that on the 2022 legislative agenda. Please know the VAR legislative agenda is a living document. There's a meeting on December 10th with Virginia Realtors leadership, where they're going to be considering 2 potential additions to the agenda. We'll be bringing out information about that publicly in the next 3-4 weeks. Throughout this and every session, your VAR government relations team will be in Richmond, working with your local government affairs directors to engage with legislators and weigh in on all the legislation that impacts real estate in the Commonwealth. You should know that we won't be doing a day on the Hill as we have done in the past, but we will be in contact with your legislators on a regular basis. So with that, I'll say, as they say in the government relations business, stay tuned to see exactly how this session is going to unroll. There was a question in the chat regarding, can I define hybrid appraisal? And I probably can, but I'm going to hold off on that to allow that to come up in the Q&A later. But with that being said, we're going to go to our first question. And the first question is posed to Delegate Hudson. Delegate Hudson, considering the 2021 is a, quote, short session with significant restrictions on bills, and perhaps you can tell us what the current number is, because I've heard 3 different numbers in the last 10 days. What are your legislative priorities? And do you have any comments on the VAR 2021 legislative agenda?
Sure. Well, first, let me say thank you so much for having me this morning. It's great to see all of you, and for everybody who's tuning in as well. I can definitely start by teeing us up just to what are we looking at for the next session. Each of us is only allowed to carry 7 bills on the House side. And I think the senator will tell you they're down to 12, I think, on the Senate side. And so that's a pretty tight docket. And so it does mean that we'll have to prioritize. I mean, I think all of us know that the top priority for every community right now is getting COVID under control, because nothing goes back to normal until we take care of the healthcare crisis at the center of our current challenges. But I think we have lots of good people who are hard at work in our public health and medical institutions on that front. And so for me, as an economist and an educator, my top priorities in the coming session are going to be schools, work, and housing. I think that nobody's going to get back to normal and back to work until we do a better job of supporting our schools. If there were ever a time to remember just how critical our public schools are and our teachers who do so much with so little, that's now. I think every parent has been reminded what it's like to do double, triple, quadruple duty if they've got little ones at home. And so what does that mean concretely for a state legislator? It means that the state needs to be stepping up and doing more. We have been burdening our localities for too long to be highly reliant on property taxes for funding our schools, and the state can be doing more to pitch in its fair share. And so I know those of us in the House are excited and putting forth some concrete revenue reforms to fix some of the structural imbalances in our tax code that will help it make it possible to fund our schools in a more sustainable way. I think that was critical work before COVID, but it's urgent work now because our schools are having to do even more with even less. And so that's top of my list. After that, I think in addition, we're going to be working hard to best support our workers, our small businesses, and housing, because housing is at the core of this public health crisis. You can't stay home if you don't have one. And so we are going to be working, I think, to continue to refine our state housing laws to make sure that everyone is on equal footing in those negotiations. I, in particular, am going to be introducing a bill to try and ward off unlawful evictions in Virginia. Right now, I think that the penalty for unlawfully evicting someone is too low, and in practice means that there are some landlords who don't take it seriously. We've heard a lot of stories from local constituents about coercive and abusive behavior, landlords coming and removing the locks or taking the door off of a dwelling in a way of forcing a tenant out in the middle of what should be a lawful eviction proceeding. I know that's not the vast majority of landlords. The vast majority of landlords are good small business owners, just like everyone else. And I think that those practices give the industry a bad name. And so what we should be doing is taking care of those unlawful actors that are leaving some of our tenants in really vulnerable positions so that we can make sure everybody is safe and healthy for the long haul.
Thank you. I appreciate the breadth of your response. Question number 2 is directed toward Delegate Bell, and feel free to go anywhere with this question as you wish, but do you have thoughts on the legislative agenda, VAR's 2021 legislative agenda? And how does the party composition, which changed in January, impact your 2021 priorities or overall in the chamber?
Okay, that's sort of those are two interesting but only slightly related questions. In terms of your agenda, what I was asking was, these are not, to the extent these are technical issues, these are not bills or topics that I have particularly studied, and I'm happy you're bringing them to us, but I'd appreciate maybe in the Q&A a little more follow up on, just, for example, I don't know what it means to have a hybrid appraisal. I could guess and pretend, but I don't actually know what that means. So would maybe tell us what the current law is, tell us what you would like to see changed, maybe tell us the advantages of that. In terms of the sort of the bigger picture, Delegate Hudson identified some of the, I think, challenges we will be facing and some of the issues that various sides will be trying to address. In terms of personal bills, we'll be bringing Senator Deeds. I get to serve on what everyone but Creigh calls the Deeds Commission, and we study mental health sort of year round and have now for several years, and come back with some recommendations. The virus has impacted mental health in a number of ways, and at the very time when we are seeing increased needs, just like you would expect, from all the stresses that come with it, whether it be direct with regards to coronavirus or just secondary impacts like loss of jobs, financial impacts, loss of housing, we are simultaneously seeing some difficulties in delivery. And so for the people truly in crisis, we have had a population problem at our institutions, bumping right up at 100% capacity now for months. The kids staying home has had two effects. A fair amount of our mental health resources are delivered through the schools, and the kids are not in the schools, so they have trouble getting it. Second, needs are identified through the schools, and so you will have a teacher identify a problem, kick it to the counselor, who then investigates and recognizes that it might be something that he or she can help, or that you need the more intensive services that, again, at least are started through the schools. And that's something that has not been possible through the virtual. In fact, my wife is a teacher's assistant at Baker Butler. She says that, of course, she observes what everybody knows, which would be the kids most in need are the ones that are least easy to see through the virtual method, that when they drop off or disappear, you're losing the chance to identify someone that may be the one that really needs the help. So for all of those reasons, I've got a number of drafts in. We're doing a little bit of this backwards. Much of the Deeds Commission meetings will be taking place in December after the filing deadline. So I filed 6 or 7 drafts of things that I think might be a problem involving mental health courts. There's a program called Therapeutic Day. We call it TDT. I had to write down what it stands for because we never use it, but Therapeutic Day treatment was identified as a problem by the Daily Progress. And they said that we are moving toward a new system, but the old system is still being used, and it's not clear that we're going to get through that transition period without significant dislocation of kids who use this program. And so that's a long way to say we need to make sure the old program's in place until the new one is ready to catch them. Got a bill on that. It may prove that there's a better way to do that over the next few weeks. And I saw that we've got multiple meetings in December to kind of go through some of these issues, and they got delayed because of the virus. In terms of the different agenda, there's 2 parts to this. So 9/10 of the bills that go through the General Assembly do not have a partisan sheen, and they either pass or they fail, but it's not because of the breakdown is on party lines. There's a percentage, and these are the ones that are usually the higher profile bills, or at least the media finds them more interesting, are the bills that do break down on party lines. And so to the party line bills, of course, there's been a change because there's been a change in the majority. And I would not expect to see the bills that are breaking on party lines pass if they were Republican measures. On the other hand, for all the rest of the bills, the General Assembly continues to trundle on. And I did at least 10, probably closer to a dozen bills last year that I brought that the Democrat-run General Assembly reviewed and considered and listened to and ultimately passed. And so for the nonpartisan bills, I don't see much of a change, just like you would hope there wouldn't be a change. For the bills that do break down on party lines, of course, there's been a difference as the majority has changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. It's we had those of us that work from time to time in Richmond, you did have the change also impacted the change in leadership in committees, and it impacts the flow and kind of the rhythm. But that's really a little bit deeper in the weeds for the folks that are working on the Hill, moving through. Next question goes to Senator Creigh. As one of the longer serving members of our delegation in both the House of Delegates as well as the Senate, can you comment on the current political atmosphere in Richmond? How has the pandemic changed the mechanics of lawmaking? And has it impacted your 2021 legislative priorities?
Well, thanks for having me and making me feel so old. You know, I still get a thrill walking in that Capitol, and I just can't believe that I get to do that sort of work. It's unbelievable opportunity that still gives me goosebumps. But the one thing the pandemic has changed is that we don't get to walk in that building anymore. We don't do our work in the Capitol. And the atmosphere has definitely changed because we don't have any, personal contact or much personal contact, except over the phone or the constant Zooms that we engage in. We can't run to somebody else's office to figure out how we can work together to get something through both sides. The urgency is still there to our work, and I think everybody still feels that. But the reality is the mechanics have completely changed. The House or the Senate during the special session met in person at the Science Museum. Of course, we didn't have the we didn't have the committee meetings and a lot of the input from the public that we would normally have, except by Zoom, and we didn't have the contact with House of Delegates members except by Zoom and by telephone. So the mechanics have changed. Yeah, maybe one of the good sides is you don't have the constant presence of other people trying to tell you how to do your job. There's more independent room for independent thought. The mechanics have also changed in this respect. Last year, for some reason, I ended up introducing over 50 bills. That's more than I'd ever introduced before. And I can tell you that last year was my 29th session, and I don't think any of the 28 were as busy or as urgent as the work we did last year. The atmosphere had a sense of urgency about it. This year, I'll be down from 52 to 12 bills. Already I've made commitments for way more than 12 that I've had to make unpleasant phone calls and just tell people I'm not able to fulfill my commitment. And I apologize the best I can. I'll find another way. If I can, I'll find another way to meet their need. And the reality is that creative legislators can still find ways to get more than 12 bills passed. You might find somebody else's bill might become a vehicle for your idea. And you've got a budget. I learned many years ago that the budget, when I'm not going to tell the complete story because I'm prone to tell stories, but I'm not going to tell this one completely. But you know, what I found in the House when I was in the House of Delegates is the members of the Appropriations Committee introduced the least number of bills of anybody else in the House, and the reason they did is because they could legislate through the budget. They could, through budget amendments, they could accomplish their goals. So the budget is still out there. You know, here's the reality is the atmosphere is also changing to a large extent over this argument about how long we're going to be in session. Here's what happened. In 1971, the Constitution was changed to allow the election year short sessions. They were set to be 30 days, but could be extended with a supermajority. The reality is they've always been extended. There's never been a 30-day session. The mechanics of putting a budget together are going to take more than 30 days. Even though we just adopted a series of amendments in October and November, there's still a significant amount of budget work to look at. Thankfully, there's certain positive signs in some of our revenue forecasts. And we are going to, no one, I think, really thinks we're going to be in session 30 days and be able to get all that accomplished. You know, and Rob points out, and I appreciate Sally's priorities too, because I support those. Rob points out the work we've done on mental health. That very much has been a partnership. A whole lot of people have been involved in that work. And one of my priorities this session will be to make sure that work can continue. You know, it shouldn't be personality driven. You know, in the 1980s and 90s, there was a commission on mental health that was basically known as the Gartland Commission. It was a permanent commission on mental health that worked toward identifying and addressing issues. After Joe Gartland left the Senate, he didn't run for re-election, I think, in 99. Maybe it was 90. It was 95 or 99, one or the other. The commission went away. It was absorbed within the Healthcare Commission, and basically the continued work on the issues that affect mental health stopped. Well, beyond the substance of the policy, where we have significant work to do on the issue of mental health, we've got to find a vehicle for continued work on mental health. We can't continue to renew this study commission that has been renewed several times, because the work will go on. You know, I remember in 2014, after we had passed the study resolution, and I worked with members of both parties and both houses to get that done in 2014. I remember I had lunch with a fellow named Richard Bonney from the law school, Richard Bonney said, "I'm so glad that you got this done. I'm so proud of this work, but you've got to know," and he said, "I'm proud of this 6-year study, but you've got to know that the work is going to take more than 6 years. The work will go on because the issues continue to be addressed. They're not static." And I found very much that he was absolutely correct. You know, so we are, you know, we're more than 6 years now into this work, and 7 years into this work, and so we have to find a vehicle for that, and that will be one of my priorities this session. As I said, you know, I've made a commitment for more than 20 bills already. A lot of those bills are going to have to be whittled down, or we'll have to find other vehicles or other sponsors. I'm going to be focusing on making sure, you know, I'm the chairman of the Privileges and Elections Committee. I want to make sure we saw a way this year to expand voting in Virginia, to see a record turnout. And I think our democracy works best when more people have the opportunity to participate. We made some changes this year, some permanent, some not permanent, to that allowed for more people to participate. We need to consider whether the changes we made that weren't permanent need to be made. Well, should those changes be permanent? I expect I will carry a bill that addresses some of those issues. I will probably carry some other election-related legislation. You know, I also chair the Criminal Law Subcommittee in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I will probably carry some criminal justice bills, because while there was a broad array of legislation we addressed this summer, there are still some matters that need to be tackled. And however long this session is, I expect it will be busy and hectic, and the only difference is we won't be scurrying around trying to find room in elevators on the Pocahontas building. We'll be going back and forth between the Science Museum and the Senate will be going back and forth between the Science Museum and our hotels.
Well, I thank you, Creigh. I did note this morning in a VPAP report, you were number 3 for bills in the Senate last year, which I found unusual based on your history. It's a, I think that the idea of focused number of bills, it's one of the things that our VAR staff reviews all the bills and their potential impact, and sometimes not direct impact, but indirect impact on the real estate industry. One of the big bills over the last couple of General Assembly sessions and enacted by referendum was question 1 on the ballot this election cycle. And it's my understanding that the funding for that was a part of the new budget that was approved. Can one of you, this is a jump ball question, speak to the idea of when we might see those changes, because the census won't, of course, be out, and what are the folks appointing the citizen members looking for in those 8 citizen members for the redistricting committee?
The 8 citizen members will be picked by a panel of retired judges. The people that are interested should apply to the Division of Legislative Services and seek a nomination from either the minority leaders or the majority leaders of the Senate and the House, the Speaker, of course. They can all participate. All those nominations matter. The judges, I think they're going to be looking for expertise, but honestly, I think that it's more of an open question as to who the judges will have the opportunity to appoint. What I heard this morning on the radio is that we will hopefully have the census data by March or April, and that's certainly consistent with what's happened in the past. But it's hard. It's easy to see that how we could have hiccups in that schedule this year because of this pandemic. Maybe the data we've had difficulty gathering the data, and as soon as we get the data, the commission will make its decision. But the panel of judges will, I hope, pick the people that have the most expertise in putting together communities of interest, keeping together communities of interest, and drawing districts that make sense.
Well, that will be helpful. I am now taking questions in the Q&A from folks. One question that had come up for Delegate Hudson in a previous conversation was, you've now been through a full General Assembly session, albeit a very different one, but I actually like it when legislators say every year is the same, it's just as unique as the last. So what can you tell us you learned from your time in Richmond and via Zoom in your first legislative session?
What didn't I learn? Yeah, it's an honor to serve, and it's an incredible experience and a heck of a trial by fire, and you are constantly learning the whole way around. I think perhaps for the purposes of our next session, the most practical thing that I learned is exactly what Senator Deeds said, which is that you have to be creative about where to put the things that you want to get done. I think the biggest practical skill that I picked up in my first session was keeping tabs on all of the other vehicles that are in motion and thinking about whether or not we could tuck something that we wanted to do into one of those pieces. For example, we had a very practical request from one of the county planning commissioner members, and I hadn't introduced a bill on anything remotely related to what she was hoping to achieve, but I had a colleague who did, and we happened to keep an eye on it and managed to get it in there and keep things moving. So I think that multitasking is so important, and it's really the practical way that you do things under the tight time constraints of the General Assembly.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
Neil, could I add something?
Certainly.
So one of the neat things is there's a constant churn. We don't have, I mean, at this point, Creigh and I are at the back ends of our tenure, I'm sure. But you have the old guys who have tried things and kind of maybe are too pessimistic, and then you always have new people coming in with big ideas. And the combination of tried that, or energy to try new things. I don't know. It's a neat setting to have such a turnover there, and we're always kind of, you come in with your ideas and you try them, and then over time, like, I never thought I would be engaged so heavily in the mental health space. That was just something that came up. It wasn't why I ran the first time, and yet that's a large part of my energy at this point. And so I would second almost everything that Delegate Hudson said.
Well,
I would just like to add that you have to, I still believe in Santa Claus, and I always told my kids, I never let them quit believing, or never let them admit they didn't believe, because I wanted them to have some sense of expectancy and urgency about Christmas morning. It was always a big deal for me. And, as a legislator, I always reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than I am today. And I think that the churn of new faces and new heads, new brains in the legislative process helps keep you fresh and helps keep the discussion alive, and it's good for it.
Well, that's great. And I'm going to put this question to Delegate Bell. We have every year is a little different dance at the General Assembly. This coming year, you have a gubernatorial race overlaid over the General Assembly. How does that impact, in addition to a short session, the kind of atmospherics at the General Assembly?
That's a good question. I think that, so Creigh and I have both taken a shot at statewide office, and so for the specific legislators, it is very difficult to juggle. To the extent you have some of my colleagues that are running, they're going to be constantly watching the clock, making, oh my goodness, tick tock, how will I get to Danville in time if this meeting doesn't end until 6? Maybe virtual, that's now dated, so maybe that doesn't matter. I think it matters less to the rest of us than I would have thought. I mean, there's some just traditions around the place that you make fun of people running for statewide office, and you see suddenly they are being awfully interested in some very obscure matter in a very faraway place, and we would, if we were in the body, we would whistle statewide and make fun of them. That probably won't happen virtually either. But other than that, I mean, there's some expressions about governors come and go, but the legislature is forever. And so I think that, all of us are having a longer window than this election cycle. All that said, it is kind of, just as a observer, it's fun to see your colleagues. They come back and say, oh my gosh, I had a terrible debate in wherever it might be, Botetourt. And you get to talk with them about their travels around the state. And when they come through your area, you get to say hello and visit with them and introduce them to your people back home.
Creigh, anything from your experience, which was not so long ago?
Well, it was longer ago than Rob's. I mean, I was the statewide office, as Rob knows, you're under constant pressure to figure out, to get back to the phones to be able to raise money. And you can't, so you want the session to be over as soon as possible. You want the sessions themselves to be over as soon as possible so you can get back on the road to go to Springfield or go to Big Stone Gap or go to Virginia Beach or go to Emporia or Danville or wherever you have to go that day, that night, to make a presentation to the 15 or 20 people that show up at your event. It's a challenging aspect, but we have, in Virginia, we have elections every single year. And it seems like we have delegates and senators that are running for things all the time. So it's just part of the process. We have to get used to it. I remember one former governor, that I admired a great deal. I still do, even though he's no longer with us. But he said, "No, I expect you've watched your votes while you've been in the legislature, haven't you?" And I was never very good about watching my votes and thinking about the future impact of those, because you have a vote to take, and it's important that you do what you think is right then, and that might not be right for your future running for some other office. This is going to be a challenging year just because of the pandemic circumstances, because of the major challenges to restore society or restore communities back to normal, to get our economy going. And just our communication is going to be different. I'm not going to see Delegate Bell or Delegate Hudson every day or every week in the hall. I'm going to, maybe we'll talk on the phone. We'll Zoom. It's going to be very, very challenging. But the election, I don't know that adds a whole lot to what's going on this year.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I've got another question that came up earlier for Delegate Hudson. Considering our new virtual nature that Senator Deeds referenced, as constituents and advocates, what's the best way to reach out to your office and communicate with you regarding bills that are before the body?
I appreciate the question. It's something that our office is actively working on right now. We have blocked off a big hunk of time on the calendar tomorrow for a team powwow about how we're going to set up office hours. Because as you know, from meeting with all of us in Richmond, usually you just stick your head in the door and say, hey, there's a bill that I care about. And so we're trying to figure out how we can replicate that environment as closely as possible. I think there are some good online tools that will let us set up appointment slots, kind of like the ones that I've been using with my students for office hours this fall. So we're going to tinker with a handful of those. I would love to follow up with you in the next week or two, and we're going to be pushing some of that information out on social media and through our email list to try to be as accessible as possible. Because a second thing that I learned among the many things is that there are a lot of really good people who are keeping an eye out for you and all of the people in the Commonwealth who stick their head in the door and say, this thing you haven't thought about is really important and you don't know that it's moving fast. And so I wouldn't do my job as well if I didn't make myself as accessible to all of you to be able to give us those little pieces of information that, you know, might not constitute a half-hour meeting, but are 2 minutes of very good advice.
Delegate Bell, anything along those lines?
I was just going to say, this is not a joke, Sally, if you do find some solution, what you're describing is a question that I think all of us are wrestling with, and the aides are actually having their training today. I just got a text from my aide, and how do you recreate the ability for a constituent or an interested person to say what you just said? It's a good bill, but there's this one problem you haven't thought of, or it's a bad bill because of this unintended consequence. And I think all of us are concerned that we're going to miss that chance to be better informed before our vote, just because of the nature of the virtual meetings. I will say one of the concerns would be the forest for the trees problem, or the needle in the haystack problem, which would just be all of us are, I certainly don't hide my cell phone number, and we have emails, we have all this flood of information. What's hard is not just getting the information, but recognizing it. Are you a constituent question? I mean, in other words, we get thousands of emails from around the Commonwealth and even outside the Commonwealth, and trying to identify the ones from home or the ones that really know what they're talking about can be difficult. And I don't have any answers. We've recognized this as a concern since, midsummer or early August, whatever, since the fall. So no joke, Sally, if you guys come up with some great ideas and they're not going to somehow be inappropriate to share, we would love to hear anything you all figure out, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I last year when we had all the gun bills, sometimes our phones would ring virtually 24 hours a day. I would say that people, you know, who want to get through should not use phones, the General Assembly phone numbers. The Pocahontas building is going to be closed to the public. Those phones are not going to be staffed. We've been advised that we're not going to have the administrative staff we've had in the past. I will have a legislative assistant, and Tracy will be in Richmond with me. I will have my office in Charlottesville staffed. The best way to reach out to us is going to be by email. Call the Charlottesville office, or call me, but the best way to reach us is going to be by email. I think if there's a better way, Sally, Rob, if you all figure it out, you know, I'm willing to listen.
I would echo that and just say concretely, here's why. When there is a big controversial bill that's gathering national attention, you get all sorts of spam phone calls, and it's just easier to filter out a spam email than picking up the phone and hearing the person on the other end. So when we do get on one of those mass email campaigns where you're getting bludgeoned by people from California, we could just set up a little filter in our inbox for the first sentence that's in all of them, and, you know, flush that to a separate folder. And so we can still see the good stuff coming in from people back home. And so for that reason, writing down what you think is easier for us to recognize that you're somebody that we serve than it is picking up the phone, which takes more time.
Well, and to that end, I want to make certain that I compliment your staffs, whether it's Jordan, Jake, or Tracy. You guys are running 16 different directions all the time, and generally speaking, I'm speaking to one of those 3 people, and they have always been accommodating and following up. And I think that our delegation has a great support staff that really gets into the deep into the weeds at times. And I want to make certain that I compliment them, because they are the way that I am able to reach to you guys so effectively on behalf of the realtors. Another question that has come up is with regard to the session. Now, Senator Deed said that that we've never had a 30-day session, and that the 45-day session is likely to occur based on the budget cycle. I wanted to give the opportunity for Delegate Bell and Delegate Hudson to weigh in on that. Delegate Bell, you get to go first.
I don't know that I have any particular insight. I've never been on the budget committee. There's the Courts of Justice Committee is seen as just a place a lot of bills go. So when we say a workhorse committee, I'm not saying anything deep. It's just the volume of the bills that are sent there. People say send it to courts, maybe they can work it out. My expectation is and that we've heard from the Speaker's office that we should be prepared for weekend sessions. So Saturday for sure, possibly Sundays. And then, but in terms of the budget, I don't know that I have insight. I do have, to speak more broadly about some of the things that Delegate Hudson mentioned, the difficulty in sharing information is not just from inside the building to without, but it's also within the building. And so the committee meetings have been very different when conducted virtually. I am hopeful that with a full session and some time to think about it, rather than a special session where it was sort of by nature being done, that just set up and changed as it went, that we can somehow recollect some of the committee meetings where you sit there and you sit with the bill and you talk for that you actually look at the bill and review what's in it, rather than the more I guess just a hurried way that some of them have been over the last few months. But we'll see. And I don't have any insight particularly into how long it'll take the budget to be done. There's certainly mechanisms like calling a special session and whatnot that are still available to various parties, of course. Thank you.
Delegate Hudson?
Sure. I'm not sure that I have much to add, except maybe one concern, and perhaps it's a question, and Senator Deed might weigh in. My understanding is that mechanically, if the session is not extended by a supermajority vote with both parties to 45 days, then the way that we would have a 45-day session is to have a kind of caboose session that would function like a special session on the budget. The concern that I have as a more junior member is that if you do it that way, it sort of means that only the members of the Appropriations Committee are really participating in the last couple weeks. And I think that should concern all of us who care about engaged and distributed government, because that means that all of the decisions are really in the hands of a dozen members who are in each chamber who are meeting together, as opposed to like we would have if we were all there in person, the kind of back and forth that comes between communities, where I can say, I'm not a member of the Appropriations Committee, but the decision that you're making has implications for the people that I serve. So I would like to share that perspective. So I have some concerns about sort of bifurcating the process in that way, because as Senator Deed said, a lot of legislating gets done in the budget. And so that sort of means there's like a mini session in which only a small number of people participate.
The budget is a vehicle for many, many things. And I agree that even though there are limited numbers of people that are involved directly in the appropriations process on the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee or the House Appropriations Committee, every member needs to pay attention. Every member needs to be involved. And Delegate Hudson is absolutely correct. To expand beyond 30 days, the legislature needs to have a supermajority. And I would probably, if I were in the minority, I would probably take the same position they've taken. And that is that we've already been in session about 150 days in 2020. We don't need a long session. And in my heart of hearts, I kind of agree with that. I'm a lawyer. I've got to make a living, and with the kind of practice I've got, if I'm not out back there doing the work, if I'm not here doing the work, and I'm by myself, I don't have a partner. So if I'm not home doing the work, it's not getting done, and the money's not coming in. So the more days I can practice, all the better. So a 30-day session would suit my lifestyle. But the reality is that there are certain revenue reports that come in pretty quickly and at certain intervals during the year, and they just aren't going to be, they aren't going to accommodate a 30-day session. And that's why it's going to take longer than 30 days just to get a budget done. Now, there are a couple of things that can happen. Number one, you could have your 30-day session. At the end of that period of time, the governor could call a special session. And I'm afraid, mechanically, the way that would work is the bills that were introduced during the 30-day session that hadn't passed would automatically die at the end of the 30 days. And as Delegate Hudson pointed out, you'd end up having a special appropriations session. Or the other part of it is this. Even though the code or the Constitution calls for a 30-day short session, there's nothing that says that 30-day session the 30 days is required. You could adjourn sine die early and then call a special session. So you could adjourn the first day or the second day or whatever, and then call a special session. There are a lot of ways there are several ways to get around the minority's position that we're going to have a 30-day session. And the reality is we're going to have to do that if we're going to put a budget together. We're going to have to do something.
Understood. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and I want to thank each of our legislators for being here at CAAR's first virtual legislative breakfast. While I think this went exceedingly well, I really hope that we can be together next December in the Hillsdale Conference Center so that we can talk again and break bread. But with that said, I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you for your listening to our legislative agenda. And I will be talking to you during session. Happy holidays, everyone.